Humanities in the Time of AI. I will try to present aspects of the book I released, but I'm beginning, since I'm French, I'm beginning with the hors d'oeuvre that you can have at the beginning of your meal. And it's ChatGPT versus Chat in the Stack. So it will mainly be Chat in the Stack since I'm speaking, but let's have a little ChatGPT first. For a book I will talk about at the end of this talk, which is different from the one I'm presenting. I asked many different authors, individual or collective authors, but also generators, pretty much the same question, which is the one you have here. What is the future of creation and our scholarship in an AI-dominated world? And as I was finishing that manuscript, I mean the collection of texts building that manuscript, I was stuck coming back from Des Moines, Iowa, where I had been working with great apes. I was stuck for, I think, 7 hours in Detroit. And I read that that very same day, Sam Altman had introduced the latest iteration of GPT, ChatGPT, with its 5th version. And Sam Altman famously now said, or infamously, said that GPT-5 was, that's the quote you have at the top of the screen, a legitimate PhD level expert now. So that's, which we might doubt of, but you know, that was the promise. So I had asked GPT-3, GPT-4 questions about the future of creation and our scholarship in AI-dominated world. I got a very long answer from GPT-5, one of the weakest ones, because GPT-5 didn't understand that when I was saying it could be a poem, a provocation, or it didn't understand that it had to choose, so it gave me the whole list, which is a sign of something deteriorating GPT-5 compared with the rest. But I got these very long set of answers, pretty much telling me the same thing, that everything will be fine. And you have some of the quote: in an AI-dominated world, creation and scholarship will not disappear into algorithmic sameness. And the final jolt is that treat AI as a new kind of colleague. So it was pretty poor, pretty bland, not very interesting. So I thought that maybe this could be turned into a black and white image, which I asked GPT. Again, 4 pages telling us that the future is bright and there will be absolute collaboration. But the picture I got that was supposed to translate visually what had been said about the future of scholarship was this one. I'm not making that up. I can prove that this is what I got. So I guess that was the truth coming through pictures instead of the texts and the consoling tone we had in writing. But today I'm presenting Humanities in the Time of AI. As was said, it was published this year by the University of Minnesota Press in a special series that is called Forerunners, for short texts that are supposed to be provocative to some extent. And you can, I'm encouraging you to buy it, but you can also access it freely online via Manifold. That's one of the specificities of that book series, that you can access all the titles for free. The book is really a large reflection on where we are right now in our work with the redefinition of the humanities as it is being prompted by the rise of artificial intelligence. But it's not exclusively on the humanities, and it's not exclusively on AI. It's really a mixture of the two. So it's mainly a theoretical book, but its roots could be located also in experimental work that I have been conducting in the Humanities Lab. I created a few years ago the Humanities Lab as a sort of structure that is currently expanding relatively rapidly. We work on the intersection of the arts, the sciences, and the humanities. One of our 4 main lines of inquiry is about artificial intelligence and the humanities. That's not the only thing we do. But through that, I conducted experiments that also gave me the opportunity to look at the internal structure of the generators, of the transformers. And it's not only reading things, but it's also working with them. Especially, that's what you had in the Harper's article I published last year in Harper's magazine. In Harper's, the article was about sort of narrative rendition of the experiment that the four of us, you saw the four of us before, you now only see 2.7 of us. Experiment we did with GPT when it was at called Instruct and 3, so beginning of GPT 3.0, then 3.5, before it would become this sort of new, it would be rebranded as ChatGPT, and before this rebranding would percolate in the more general discussion about artificial intelligence. We were asking the machine to write poems on the basis of a few lines by distinct authors. We could discuss that. We were also asking humans to do the same, and we were comparing those. So Metal Machine Music is giving an idea of that. More recently, we conducted, some of us, you see the names on the screen, conducted an experimental foray on the automated treatment of semantic change over time, looking particularly at the way the term indigène in French, which is the root for indigenous, changed in meaning, and if an AI system could see a change over time. Most of the, what is called word embedding, the basis for both generators and many AI treatment of texts rely on putting words together and attributing what is called meaning to the degree of proximity or degree of distance in between the words. But it's a static approach. It's not designed to tell you if the words are moving in meaning across time. So we use some techniques related to that in order to look into the problem. And that article was published in a big computational linguistics conference this year. So that's the basis of what I'm going to tell you, but I'm not going to explain those. But just to say that it's not only me speaking ex cathedra from my chair about AI in general. It's really coming from a work that is experimental and internal with it. Humanities in the Time of AI, you may have noticed that the very structure of the title is a reference to a famous novel by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, a famous novel that became a bit more present in the general culture during the pandemic. El amor en los tiempos del cólera, love in the times, if you stick to what the Romance languages allow you to say, that is the plurality of the times of cholera. The idea behind the title in Garcia Marquez's novel is not very far from the idea behind the title of this very famous French movie shot by Alain Resnais in the 1950s, and on the basis of a script by the French writer Marguerite Duras, Hiroshima, Mon Amour. In both cases, you have the paradoxical or unexpected relation that is made between love and what is the worst. In one case, cholera. In the other case, the bombing of Hiroshima. The movie by Resnais, the novel by Garcia Marquez are not telling us that in order to fall in love or in order to find true love, we absolutely need the bombing of Hiroshima, or we absolutely need cholera. But what those texts and movie are telling us is that even in those moments of absolute sheer catastrophe, we can find something like love. And I reproduce that here, saying that if the time of AI is potentially a catastrophe for the humanities and scholarship, it's quite likely that we will see a sort of ideological opportunistic use of AI in order to dismantle some of the things we believe in within the humanities. But although there is a danger, it's not the same thing as the bombing of Hiroshima, of course, but although there is a danger of destruction, humanities, in fact, right now could still be conducted, could still be done, and it might even be more crucial now to rediscover humanities, and of course love, but I'm not going to speak so much about love today. So in this respect, the main thesis in the book is that we have a paradoxical opportunity. that it is true that AI is generative AI with the transformer architecture, with the generation of texts, images, and so on. All of those elements are moving onto terrains, provinces that are usually being associated with the humanities. But it's a paradoxical opportunity for us to rethink what we wish to do with the humanities. So I'm in the book trying to reclaim a view of the humanities that would not be anchored only in a sort of a transactional version, not only be bound historically, or not only viewed from the perspective of one culture. If you read books, if you have an interest on big books by scholars about the humanities that are being published in the US, I'm not sure I had that taste, but since I was writing that essay of mine, I read some of those books. You often find the claim in the most widely received or widely regarded books on the humanities published by American university presses. You usually find the idea that the humanities are an American invention. American invention, a post-World War II invention that is very historically confined, very strictly linguistically and culturally defined, which is a claim you can make, but that's really the claim I'm not making at all. So I'm saying that we can certainly see how the term the humanities vis-a-vis the social sciences and the sciences is an effect of a certain particular time and structure. We can say that. But what we call the humanities is not restricted to this particular occurrence in time and in space and in culture. So I'm trying to reclaim a view of the humanities as something much broader. That would be transhistorical. That is, we see humanistic scholarship in ancient Greece or ancient Rome. We see transhistorical humanistic scholarship that we could call humanistic scholarship in classical China, in classical Japan. We see something in Ethiopia as well that we could call the humanities. So I'm trying really to have a more encompassing and not strictly defined view of the humanities. Epistemic set of discursive, interpretative, and significative disciplines. That is, you have disciplines in the humanities. It's not one thing. It's about knowledge. If it's not about knowledge, it could be great, but it's a bit different. It's a set, that is, it's a group. It has its organization, but it's not only an addition of independent lines of inquiry. Discourse is essential, that is, language is at the center for the production of this scholarship, and oftentimes is at the center of what this scholarship is about. It relies on interpretation, which is not the same thing as decoding or deciphering. I'm going to insist on that a bit later. And there is a relation to signification or significance, both. There is to something semantic. We are making meaning through the humanities. It's not that we are necessarily making things, but we are making meaning. And it also has a significance, including at a personal level, which is not necessarily what is happening when you work on a cell in biology. Deriving from that, I propose that the humanities have always been more interested in creation, but that today we are facing a new behemoth that is telling us that it generates. So that's a chance to us. Engineers could have called what GPT is doing creative AI. I mean, we would be unhappy with that. I would be very unhappy with that. But the chance is that the term that was selected was generative and generation and not creation. There are reasons internal to the engineering community for that particular case and particular taxonomy. And I believe it's a chance. It's also a reminder for us that there is a distinction between generation and creation. And that although we do both as humans and in the humanities are more closely related to creation. Going back to that in a few seconds. Creation as a subject and an object, that is, it's not only objective knowledge. It is maybe not a subjective knowledge through and through, but it is a knowledge that has a subject, the knowledge of the humanities. We are being engaged by it on the subjective level. Differential inquiry and transformation are important there. Differential because we cannot say that at one given point in time, we have a consensus on the definition of an object within the humanities, whereas in one given point of time, in standard science, we tend to have a non-differential consensus. Of course, the consensus will appear at one point. And transformative is relating to the fact that, and we know that very well as readers, as students, as professors, that we are also being transformed on a personal basis through the immersion in literary texts, through the contemplation of an artwork, through a process of philosophical thinking. The last part, there are what we could call bureaucratic operations of the mind. It is, I mean, the term of bureaucratic operation is coming from a mathematician, in fact. French mathematician and logician Jean-Yves Girard, who speaks about the bureaucracy of mathematics to refer to all those automated operations in math that are not when you solve the problem, when you find the insight, but that are what you need to write in order to convince the community. So he makes a big difference between the bureaucratic operation and the creative, what I would call the creative operation. That's true in math. That's not unique to us in the humanities, but it's particularly important to us to acknowledge that there is not only creation in the humanities, there are also, I mean, you count the lines, you count occurrences of a term, you see that this is a shape, and this shape is coming back. When we write, although we often try to make different kind of sound, to create a different kind of sound, there might be routines. So there are bureaucratic operations. Those ones are very, very, I mean, let's give them to AI, because AI is quite good at them. And let's make a beautiful gift to artificial intelligence. All the things that are a bit bureaucratic and meaningless in our own practice, we can outsource them. I will give you some examples, but it will be later on. So my problem here is to redefine innovation. Two problems. One is redefining innovation. The other one is redefining intelligence. Innovation in the sense of producing something new. And I believe that we tend to oversimplify the question of what it is to make something new within humanistic scholarship, for instance. To make something new, sometimes random associations will do. I mean, that has been, I mean, this sort of unexpected strategy has been key to many avant-garde practices in the arts in the 20th century, especially. So it's not something we can forget. And there are random associations of things, of words, of images, of objects that give something new. You also have this process on the cognitive level of trial and error. So through different trials and errors, you are finding a new approach to solve a puzzle, for instance. But that's not the same. Random association, trial and error, that's not the same strategy. Invention is a bit different. So you're beginning to see the question, where is generation? I'm not telling you right now, where is generation? Invention could be understood as a sort of a strategy that is looking through different paths to create something new. So one way to invent is by doing token variation, token not in the technical sense of AI, but really tiny bits of things. That is, you are variating a space. If you're thinking of the teaching of rhetoric as a practice, it's often being presented as part of what you do. You could recombine elements. The elements are there, you recombine them, that makes something new. You could rearrange, which is slightly different from recombining, because by rearranging, I mean larger sets than just the ideas or the issues. I mean, there are many other ways, but that's what I would call invention, where you have a sort of template that you are shifting things around, adopting a sort of consistent strategy that could even be, to some extent, outsourced to a computer. And I'm making the case that creation is different. That creation is a way to bypass the limitation of invention as well. And generation, where it is some of you may know that there is Emily Bender, a famous computer scientist, who said in a paper that is heavily quoted in the engineering community, that the generative AI models, the large language models, are mainly what she called stochastic parrots. Stochastic in the sense of random. So if we were to follow Emily Bender, the large language models would make new things only by random associations. which I believe is not the case. For having worked on the poetry generated by GPT 3.5, I believe it's more than that. It would make my life happier if it were only that, but I believe it's not fair to the large language model. So where is generation? It's a question we can ask. If you are Sam Altman and selling your products for billions of dollars, you will say that generation is equal to a creation, but that's just the word of a salesman. So you should not believe in that necessarily. Redefining innovation, redefining intelligence. Etymological root for intelligence, it's inter, the prefix, in between, and legere. Legere is a very interesting word in the Indo-European languages. It mainly means in Latin, I mean, the original sense of all the words with the same root is to collect. Even law, lex, is coming from the same root. It's to collect things. And then you have a sort of sense tied to cognition and language that appears in Greek. That same root in classical Greek is giving you lego, which also means to speak. In Latin, lego means to read, not to speak, but to read. So you have this basic idea of intelligence as a way to select and maybe as a way to link things together. Why do we have legere that goes from collecting pieces of things to reading? It's because it's not only that we collect the letters, but we also link them together, and so we can read them. And maybe another way to look at it in a sort of more literal and therefore a more false way, but maybe more innovative or more creative, is to think that intelligence would be something like reading in between, reading in the midst of things, or reading between the lines. If intelligence is about selecting and linking, then artificial intelligence, as we know it today, is doing that. So if this is your definition of intelligence, then fine, that's it. If this is reading between the lines, then it might be a bit more open to discussion. So part of what I'm saying here is related to two books of mine. I'm not going to give you the full spiel, but the basis for the theory was laid out in my 2015 book, The Intellective Space, that you have in the middle, where I tried to make a distinction between cognition and intellection. Cognition is a very old style word. It was mainly used within medieval scholastic philosophy. And in the 1950s, cognitive was recycled by people who wanted to make new cases about the way the mind works and new cases about the computer. So you have the alliance of a very old style term, cognitio, that was very technical and very medieval, to link to show what is happening at the level of computer in terms of operations, and to claim that what is happening within a computer is similar, or maybe, depending on where you stand, equal to the way things are being processed and thought in the animal human mind. So what I tried to do in the intellective space is to recycle another word that is as ancient and as passé as cognitio, which is intellectio. Pretty much in the medieval texts, they mean the same thing. It's the act of intelligence or the act of knowing. But I'm trying to make a big distinction in the intellective space in poetry and mind, saying that cognition is more on the automatic side, is more on the repeatable side, is more on that's what you have on the common side, the ordinary, the identifiable, the predictable. And intellection is also how we think, probably less often. And it's more a question of performance, of de-automatization, something that we share as we do right now. We are sharing something. Something that is extraordinary, differential, unexpected. So that's the backbone, and that explains what I try to argue in Humanities in Time of AI. Sort of interlude, I don't know if you know the organoids, which is the new euphemistic term to refer to parts of brains that we create in labs. So you can have an aggregation of cells that grow, and it's a kind of part of a brain that is gradually being cultivated or cultured. So the scientific community call that an organoid, so that people would not panic. So it's You don't have brain in it, but that's what it is. So you have here a cross-section of an organoid. In a recent article, a bit speculative, but a group of researchers who were speaking of the organoid as a 3D brain cell culture proposed that we could create a 3D brain cell culture that could be made more computer-like. So one way to go in the future would be to create those kind of wet brains that would be more computer-like, and therefore the interface with the computer would work better than our own. You know that there are several projects right now to implant more electrodes to create more direct interface between computers and brains. So that's one. And if we are just deciding to become the operators collectively, to become the operators of GPT, we will be like that. So one direction in the future is that we are being made more computer-like. So that's not the path I'm taking. And I'm saying in the book, two things that go together that might sound at odds with each other, or at least in tension, which is that AI is us and that we are not AI at the same time. By this, I mean that if we look at AI thinking human versus the machine, or artificial intelligence versus natural intelligence, and there is no common ground. So we should, as human, for instance, attack artificial intelligence, or we should, as human, surrender because artificial will always be better than human. We are missing the point. We have different ways of thought and thinking. We have different ways of processing ideas, and it is not that the human or the human experience is one thing that we could completely oppose to the mechanic. On top of that, as a humanist, I must acknowledge the fact that many absolutely humanistic theories have given way to artificial intelligence as we know it. For instance, all the question about meaning and the generation of texts is, as we see it in, for instance, GPT, DeepSeek, and others, is relying on hypotheses about meaning and about the nature of language that were being presented from the late 19th century up to the 1950s, that were coming from classical philologists, historians in general, philosophers, and there would be no generative AI without philologists such as Saussure deciding to stop reading only Sanskrit and Greek texts and reflecting on linguistics. So AI is us in this sense as well. It is, as generative AI, which is relying on self-learning algorithm, is also us, because although the algorithms are supposed to self-learn, someone programmed and created those algorithms in the first place, which is still us. And of course, the training corpus is it's the library. As we all know, the content of the libraries have been turned into data sets for GPT and others. And it's on the basis of all the texts that were written by humans that GPT could now say hello when we say hello. We are not AI because we are not one thing. And because AI is just one proposition about what we are. So we should take the two together constantly. And we have the choice, therefore, of becoming more computer-like, like the organoids, or to maybe move away from that and use the computer to do something. Trying to be maybe a bit quicker on that. Alan Turing has become a hero of our time. I mean, I believe it's unfortunate, but there are usually I have a very bad time with admirers of Turing. In fact, my book Humanities in the Time of AI was almost first time it happened to me, almost rejected because the anonymous reviewer was saying that I was awful with Alan Turing, who is so wonderful. So it's true, I tend to be quite awful, but I won't be too awful today. I'm just reminding you that in his 1947 lecture on the automatic computing engine, so very early on, and for a specific community of mathematicians and computer scientists, he spoke about about masters and servants, that's the humans. and said that, that's the quote you see, as time goes on, the calculator itself will take over the functions both of masters and servants, end of quote. So you see the social description that Turing is basing himself upon, which is that in society you have masters and servants. So it's for computation, but still. And that the calculator, the computer will replace both of them. Hence these quotes. It may happen, however, that the masters will refuse to do this, that is giving up to the computer. They may be unwilling to let their jobs be stolen from them in this way. I think that a reaction of this kind is a real danger, end of quote. So the danger, again, is that you would refuse to cede the way to computers. A few years later, on the BBC, Alan Turing is pretty much saying the same thing, but he's removing masters and servants because it's a larger audience, so it doesn't look as good. And he speaks about the intellectuals, but that's the synonym in this lecture for the masters. The servants were the actual calculators who were almost exclusively women, by the way. So that those were the servants in question. So he's making the case about the intellectuals or the masters being afraid of putting out of jobs. And in the TypeScript, he doesn't really explain why it would be bad to be afraid of being put out of one's job. So he found at the very last minute, and he added that with a pen on the TypeScript, what the intellectuals could do, and this is what you will see. They could be trying to understand what the machines were trying to say. So that's what he had, which is today being proposed to us as a task for the humanities, that the humanities could remain as the interpreters of the generated text. So again, that's not where I am. There are many common critiques of large language models. I'm not going to explain that. I believe they are valid concerns, but I'm more interested in the following limitations in current generative AI, because I believe this is where the difference is appearing. The problem that I see mainly is that they are anchored in the past. I mean, that's their training set. So they need to go back to what has been said in the past. The models are probabilistic, and because they work on probabilities, they give you what is mostly probable. So everything that is outside of the probability range is being erased because it's unlikely. But that's not, one could imagine a certain kind of AI that would be more into the unlikeliness, but there are consequences there. That is, if you believe that the humanities are about extraordinary acts of thinking, then generative AI is dragging you down to the ordinary. The expression is impersonal. It could use many affective tones. It's not that sometimes you see that AI is unable to express feelings. In fact, it's very able to express feelings it doesn't have. But impersonal expression is different in this respect. It lacks integration, which is more a problem of architecture. I mean, you know that if you ask GPT or any comparable LLMs to generate a text, it's very difficult to have an integration for the simple reason that the large language models in the transformer architecture predict not even word by word, but they predict token by token, which is usually a smaller unit than the word. So, of course, if you write fragments of word by fragment of words, there is no reason you would integrate an arc. Just difficult to imagine. It is interestingly algorithmic, and that's a complicated point to some extent. Some people say, no, it's not algorithmic. I say, yes, it is, but maybe we could discuss that. If we believe that there are different regimes of thought, noetic regimes, that there is intellection and cognition, for instance, then it's very clear that generative AI is tied to a model of thought, a model of that is really on the cognitive side. That is, the other regimes of thought are not going to be simulated because they are being ruled out as insignificant or as noise by the very programming. It's different from having different architecture. It's an interesting question. Do we need different AI architectures? Probably we need that, but it's a different architectures are not the same thing as different regimes of thought. And the last point, which is sometimes a bit more difficult to get across, is that there is no signification in GPT, we still attribute signification to the text that GPT has been generating. So the counterintuitive claim is that now that we have AI, for me, it is more time than ever to focus on creation, to learn languages, to go beyond the ready-made, to be doubtful of grandiose claims and to interpret, because all of those things are activities we are not going to see happening with the kind of AI we have today and the kind of AI we will have tomorrow, if that kind of AI remains anchored in the current architectures. If it's a different architecture that nobody has discovered yet, I'm not going to speak about that because I don't know what it could be. I'm wrapping up, but just to say, because I'm very negative to some extent, but I was speaking about the bureaucratic operation, so I want to showcase an example of AI use in classical philology. I'm taking classical philology because it's, for people, especially outside of classical philology, I guess the idea is that this is the furthest point away from the use of AI, which is not the case. Or one could say that it's difficult to imagine, at least in the US, the history of the humanities without paying attention to the history of classical philology at some point. So what AI could do is to give us a digital context that is multifaceted. And for those of you who may have used Perseus or equivalent digital collections of classical text, that's an obvious thing. You can also, if you're not too good with morphology, you can ask the computer to determine to you what is the declension, what is the case, and so on. In papyrology, you have as the background the Herculaneum scrolls. Some of you may know about those scrolls that have been charred in the eruption of Vesuvius and that were not readable because if you open them, you destroy them. So some of them have been deciphered recently, very recently, I mean last year, using AI. Stylometry, which is a way of counting elements that are supposedly stylistic to have insight about the text. That is something that philologists have been doing for centuries and that you can easily ask a computer, maybe not GPT because GPT is not good at that, but to ask a computer to do. Etymology to some extent, some semantics, the study of semantics, I have my doubts, but there are some elements. So those are very typical bureaucratic or cognitive activities within philology. It's just that there was a mistake if we ever thought that the end of classics or the goal of philology was papyrology. No, we want to know what is on the papyrus so that we can think of the text that is on it. So in this respect, reading is not deciphering. Access to a document is not the same thing as making interpretation of it. Knowledge is not equal to information. There is a room, a very large room for all of those elements, but that's a distinct set of inquiries. And I'm ending with the fact that, as Suzette has mentioned, we are launching a new book series with Cornell University Press. So that's a Greek term, Mechanema, that you can pronounce in different ways, depending on the kind of pronunciation you wish to get. It will be made of short, incisive, and hopefully thought-provoking books. The very first title will be, maybe not that title, but it will be a collection of short texts by humans and non-human authors on the future of creation in AI-dominated world, which is the question I was beginning with today. We'll have a sort of more theoretical and more narrative take on the automated inquiry that Iman Termina, my colleague in Romance Studies, Jacob Matthews, my PhD student in French, who is currently a visiting lecturer of information science at Bowers nearby. So you see that we really do cross disciplinary boundaries, and myself will summarize in this book, and probably Fritz Breithaupt will give us, who is currently at Penn, will give us the English version of a book he's about to write in German about experiences and what it makes to look at experiences on the side of experimental psychology vis-a-vis artificial intelligence and questions of questions of automation. So I'm not saying I should come back to chatting the stacks for every one of those books, but I will be happy to present some of these. And I've been pretty long, so it's time for questions and answers. Thank you for your attention. Yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was fascinating. I have so many questions, but I'm going to spare you. I'm going to ask only one. In which way AI is a proposition of or on the humanities, of the humanities?
Could you say it again?
Yeah, I think at some point you were dwelling on the relations that AI has with the humanities, and at some point you describe it as being a proposition. Is that regarding the functionality or the capacities that AI have that are the same that we also have, like some capacities that we share, or it is in any other?
So it's a complicated question, in fact. But I mean, one aspect is that there would be no AI, but especially there would be no generative AI without a very humanistic reflection on the meaning of words. It's coming from Wittgenstein. It's tied up to linguists in the 40s and 50s, for instance. So one could say on that basis, or some people could be tempted to say on that basis, that you have the theories that have been made by humanists. Now you have a product that is validating to some extent some of those theories, and that the baton has been passed. So there would be a sort of ideological view of AI as the next step. So it would be compatible with me saying we are not facing a complete opposition, but it would be a sort of a snarky way of agreeing with me and disagreeing, and saying it's just that this is the future. Or I mean, it's now it's just something we can outsource. And I think there are some elements we can outsource. But that's more for generative AI than AI in general that I'm speaking here. Then in the sense that AI is generating texts, as long as we believe that the humanities exist through a discursive production, which is after all how we determine who is going to get tenure or not. That is, you're absolutely brilliant, but you have not published your first book. In most universities these days, as a humanist, you will not get tenure. So as long as we see the production of text as something absolutely essential to the task of the humanities. I'm not saying we were wrong to say that, but then that's Sam Altman telling you, okay, so GPT-5, not even 6, GPT-5 is already at the PhD level. So it's already able to do that. We may have doubts, but what do we answer? It's a sort of proposition that is not coming from AI. It's a proposition that is coming from the technological complex giving way to AI. It's not AI as such. And in this respect, I think there are deep affinities between some ways of looking at the humanities and some ways of looking at AI. And one could think of the effect that the series of articles, then the book by Franco Moretti created about graphs, maps, trees. And many of the claims he makes, which were absolutely wrong at the time, are as wrong as ever today. But the next question is, why do we have those kind of claims coming from people with a very humanistic training who are clearly not stupid? So why do we have that within ourselves? So there is a coincidence between a certain kind of proposition about the humanities coming from humanists that suddenly is taking a new function, because that coincides pretty much with what the technological complex is telling us about ourselves. So that's more along those lines.
Can you introduce yourself? When do you ask a question?
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm Seth Turlow. I actually did my PhD here, and I'm back as a visiting scholar for the year. I think this follows on that. It's more focused, though. I'm curious, having not read your book, how you distinguish, I think you called them noetic regimes, from genres of discursive performance. And I mean, I can, by genres of discursive performance, what I mean, of course, is that, a generative language model can behave discursively as my therapist, as my calculus tutor, as a fellow poet who is helping me write poems and so forth. And I guess if those genres of discursive performance don't basically qualify as distinct noetic regimes, I'm curious what does.
I see your point. So the completely true at the level of the genres, it could emulate. I mean, generative AI is quite good. In the book Humanities in the Time of AI, I have 15 chapters, I think, but at the beginning or in the end of each chapter, you have a text generated automatically. And probably the best one that is generated automatically is the letter that I asked the transformer to write on behalf of Odysseus, telling Penelope that he's not coming back to Ithaca because he has found love. And that's closer to Flaubert and Madame Bovary than it is to Homer, but that's probably the best text that I saw generated by a system. So the discursive genre of the Dear John or Dear Jane letter is completely there. It's a bit rude, but not too much. So you have, I mean, it's quite, and again, there is no emotion in it. But my concern, which is the one I have in the intellective space, is more about what is happening in the mind. And part of what was the cognitive revolution favored by the advent of computers was that suddenly we could make at least legitimate hypotheses about the way the mind works, moving away from the behaviorist models that consisted in saying it's a black box, and maybe because we cannot, it consisted in saying two things. First, it's a black box, we cannot comment on that, and then since we cannot comment on that, maybe there is nothing in the black box, which was always the sort of hidden, sometimes not so hidden, but implicit conclusion. I believe cognitive science, although it's an open field with many different theories of cognitive science, gave us an ability to look at what is happening in the mind. And in this respect, I tend to consider, I might change my mind in the future, but I tend to consider that the way operations of thought work in the systems we have is completely different from the way we see operations of thought in a human animal brain. Mm-hmm. A few researchers right now are trying to make the case that it's pretty much the same thing. I would say the majority believes that there is a vast difference of implementation. But what is the technical point about the implementation of thought has wide-ranging consequences. So for me, the regimes of thoughts are really relating not to genres, but to internal of the brain and the mind in general, and how the mind is creating novelty or is making sense of things. So that's a divergence there. Yes.
I have a question online. Thank you for this presentation, Laurent. This was so interesting. You spoke about intelligence and cognition and generation, but I would like to hear your thoughts on the artificial part of AI. My sense is that part of the reticence and enthusiasm about AI is that the artificial, understood as the non-natural, is seen as the technological part, but it also parallels our sense of climate doom, in that artificial intelligence will survive climate disaster. Do you see a connection here?
Seems to me that there are two directions. One is about the artificial and the other one is about climate change. So if we'll begin with climate change, it's complicated to answer. It may be the case that AI would survive some climate change in the way we cannot, but the most probable scenario is that AI will continue to precipitate climate change, because what we see right now is that the level of consumption in terms of energy is just insane. So it's absolutely insane, and it is rapidly happening, right? So that's a bit outside of my field of knowledge, but it might rather precipitate climate change. That's really what I would say. Then, if there is no energy, I doubt that we are right now in a situation where we could imagine the AI system creating new energy. Although some people are trying, I was reading briefly an article this morning about sort of dissidents coming from OpenAI, coming up with LLM embodied robots that would then conduct experiments and would revolutionize science. And so we'll see. We'll see. On the other part, the artificial appeal, there is clearly an appeal. Artificial things clearly have an appeal in our culture here. That's quite obvious. But what I'm trying to say when I'm not making an absolute distinction between the human and the machine, and when I'm speaking about cognition and intelligence, is that we are pretty mechanical ourselves. So the problem for me is not so much artificial intelligence versus natural intelligence, that one would be better because we are natural, so we like, or I like artificial things, so I'm more. So it's more like I use AI because that's the term everybody uses. I use more AI than artificial intelligence because I don't want to insist too much on the artificialness. For me, AI stands right now rather for a certain mode of artificial intelligence that is favoring a certain way of thinking. Plus, AI is an index for a discursive continent. When Sam Altman is saying we are at the level of a PhD level, I don't know if he believes that really, but that's very typical. I mean, he may, but that's very typical of a way of this sort of hyperbolic rhetoric that is now impossible to completely cut from the reality of AI.
We have to have time.
Yes, one more question. Yes.
So I didn't read the book, but I read your article on Harper's, and one of the questions that the article raises is that of aesthetic quality. And I think it's very fascinating because you suggest that it's a category that has been somehow rejected because of the hierarchies or the positionalities it implies. But obviously, when we have a machine or like a system that's producing literature that, or like text that look a little bit like ours, it's the problem of how to judge them. What are the criteria for aesthetic quality? Come back. So I wanted maybe to ask you to talk a little bit about that. How like the idea of aesthetic quality is coming back, if it's coming back, and also if you think that in a sense the AI-generated creative writing is changing or will change our way of judging literature per se, because I feel like maybe what we consider literature is gonna change accordingly to what the AI can produce, considering that there is this strong idea of aesthetic autonomy at the basis of what we consider literature, and AI-produced texts do not seem to match this autonomy. So yeah, this sort of constellation of ideas.
So I will respond, maybe not completely, but maybe a sort of diagonal way, transversal way. One of the things I'm saying in the article, and I have a similar position in the book for obvious reasons, is that we, not necessarily us, but we collectively have tended to content ourselves with what I would call more mediocre, more ready-made visions of the literary process. We didn't need GPT for that. That's a process that has occurred before GPT would appear, and it's us at one point being. It's tied. It's not only tied to that, but it's tied to a doubt about aesthetic qualities, or about is this book more powerful, stronger than this one? Questions such as these have been in the last decades of scholarship, but also in society at large, have been often perceived as wrong or inaccurate or maybe offensive. Usually because there is a very romantic view of if the book is groundbreaking, then the author should be. And so many people are unhappy with saying that this person is higher than the others. But the consequence that the book is groundbreaking or is a masterpiece, moving from that to the person who wrote it deserves to be carried in a golden throne. I mean, that's an inference we don't have to make. But it is true that socially, in a democratic setting, there is a problem there. But it's just that books, poems, ideas are not have no reason to be organized according to a democracy. I mean, they have no rights as in the same sense as a citizen would have. So globally, we have accustomed ourselves as scholars to the suspension of judgment about qualities. Then the social experiment that is called the social media happening everywhere internationally has showed us that we are happy with the stupidest claims being put immediately online on Twitter and so on, and that we are responding to that. So what I'm saying is that the technological apparatus as well, independently of generative AI, has been pushing the envelope for ready-made, very standardized ways of speaking, moving, reacting, living. And that if those things had not taken place, we would read what GPT-5 is writing and say, so what? But because we on the one hand tend to say we cannot really judge on the differences of text being produced or artworks, and because on the other hand we are overwhelmed with the worst kind of prose or the worst kind of ideas, we are now thinking, okay, this looks quite good. Maybe not earth-shattering, but acceptable. And so I believe we collectively have abandoned some of those claims that insisting on creation, insisting on the multiplicity of signification. And now that's the paradoxical opportunity. Now GPT and all those different transformers are showing how wrong we were to do that, because they can just do the standard thing. They can do the average thing. But why should we be happy with the average or the standard? Is the at least in the operations of the mind, is the big question there.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But I imagine if Professor Dubreuil is available, he will answer more questions after. So,
Thank you.